Imagine if you harbored an organ that had been overlooked, that weighed about as much as the brain, and in some ways was just as important to who we are, but that we knew even less about, and that we treated with such disregard. Wouldn't you want to know more about it, especially if it was turning out that new technologies and new techniques were letting us make discoveries about it at an unprecedented rate? Well, it turns out that we do have something just like that, our gut microbes, and indeed the microbes all over the rest of our body. So our collection of microbes weighs about 3 pounds, about as much as a brain, and in some ways it turns out to be incredibly important for determining all kinds of important things about who we are. For example, the microbes that you have in your gut determine whether or not some medications are toxic to your liver. For example, the drug acetaminophen, which is the active ingredient in Tylenol, or paracetamol for those of you watching this internationally. Whether or not that's toxic to your liver, it depends in great part on whether or not you have particular groups of sulfate-reducing microbes in your gut. Similarly, the microbes that we have help us digest our food, and in some cases they seem to even steal genes from our food in order to help us digest it. Some of their other functions are that they train your immune system, and they may influence your behavior and affect your health in all kinds of subtle ways, or even obvious ways that we're only just now beginning to discover. So let's throw out a few numbers about our microbes. While we're starting to discover about the microbiome, may even lead us to reconsider how human we are in the first place. So, for example, each of us consists of about 10 trillion human cells, but we have as many as 100 trillion microbial cells on and inside our bodies. So in that case, they outnumber us by about 10 to 1 in terms of the sheer count of cells, and by this count we're only about 10% human. But you might say, hey, wait a minute, it's really our DNA that makes us human, our genes. So let's think about this in terms of our genes. Each of us has about 20,000 human genes, depending on what exactly you count. But we have between 2 and 20 million microbial genes. And so by the count of the unique genes that we have associated with us, we're really only 1% to 0.1% human. So this is really remarkable in a way, right? The 3 pounds of microbes that we carry around with us has 10 times as many cells and 100 to 1,000 times as many genes as our own bodies and our own genomes. Now let's think about this in terms of similarity. As you probably heard from the results of the Human Genome Project, and especially the Human Genome Diversity Project, each of us shares essentially all of our DNA. So for example, you and the person you're sitting next to share 99.99% of your DNA on average. But then when you consider how much of your microbiome you share, probably you're 90% different in terms of your microbiome. So in other words, what this means is that you are perhaps not a beautiful and unique snowflake genetically, but perhaps your particular collection of microbial symbionts is. So let's get into a few definitions, because there's a lot of confusion about the microbiome versus the microbiota. When we're talking about the human microbiota, what we're talking about is a particular community of microbes that inhabits a particular location in the human body. And strictly, this should contain everything, including the bacteria, the archaea, the viruses, and very tiny eukaryotes, which are cells that, like our own human cells, contain nuclei, but in this case, they're typically single-celled organisms, where that one cell lives free by itself rather than making up a more complex organism. However, in many of the studies of the human microbiota, because of technical limitations, we're going to be focused on the bacteria, which, although they comprise the vast majority of the microbiota, some of those other components, especially the viruses and the eukaryotes, can be important as well. Now, this is in contrast to the human microbiome. So the human microbiome is the collection of all of the genes that are contained in the microbiota. And so when we're talking about the microbiome, strictly we're talking about the gene level, as opposed to the microbiota, where we're talking about the organism level.